I thought, okay, I'm gonna print out some press releases, we're gonna look at some pictures on the wall, and then lo and behold, two people who were in Krakow are with us today. Emily Meyer and Liza Johnson. So we are gonna hear their firsthand accounts of what happened at this assembly. And some of you may be wondering, what is LWF? What is Lutheran World Federation? So Lutheran World Federation is the global expression of the Lutheran Church. It is made up of, I believe, 150 member churches from around the world. And it was formed after World War II, when there was just desire to work in solidarity as Lutheran churches across the world. And I'm sure that both Liza and Emily could tell us even more about what LWF is and what they do. I know their mission is to work together for a just and peaceful and reconciled world. So I want to invite Emily to speak first because she brought all these items and is going to do a little show and tell for us and tell us about her experience. And then we'll have Liza come up and tell us about her experience. Let's welcome Emily.
Hello. I was invited to join the worship team about a month ago. This far away, I think it's up. Okay. I was invited by Tom Witt, about a month ago to join the worship team because the planning member, the team member who was from Brazil was suddenly unable to make it, and they knew they needed one more person to coordinate worship. So my job at the assembly was really to be behind the scenes. So Liza can tell you what actually happened at the assembly, and I can tell you what happened behind the scenes in worship, because that's where I spent all of my time. I really wasn't able to attend any of the assembly things because I was either planning or creating or choreographing or then rehearsing the things that were happening in worship. And it was, I think Tom Witt's big, huge idea was we met in Krakow, Poland in their newer conference center, which is also sort of an opera theater hall. And we had two spaces. The plenary space was the bigger of the two, and it truly feels like an opera hall with the three, like sort of the sweeping main floor and then two extra giant tiers above that in the way back. And Tom saw that space and hated it because how do you do worship with 1,200 people in that kind of a space? But then he thought fabric was a way to use that height. So our first dramatic thing was we had these 10-foot long pieces of fabric in the colors of the theme colors, which were red, green, and blue. And my job was to figure out how to get them to drop from the third tier down to the main floor without setting off the fire alarm. This was the big concern of the people who ran the place, that we were going to have the fire alarm go off in the opening worship service. That went off without a hitch, and then 3 hours later, the fire alarm did go off, and all 1,200 people had to evacuate the building. But it was not our fault. So I just did a lot of manipulating the fabric, and one of the really fun things was different countries brought us fabric, so that's why we have the different fabric up here, which we used to adorn all of our serving tables for communion. And our first serving of communion was at opening worship, and then in closing worship we also shared communion. And opening worship, we used the same exact cups as Our Savior's Lutheran, the compostable cups, and there were a lot of people saying, "What is this?" They didn't know what it was. So that was just kind of a fun. And serving communion was a huge question mark. Because we're from all over the world, there were hours and hours and hours spent on how do we bless the elements, what elements can or cannot be used, do they need to be in the room in order to be officially blessed and therefore serviceable to, like, can we serve everybody bread that has not been in the room where the words of the institution were uttered, and with 3 tiers and 1,200 people getting bread that had been on the table out to the, I mean, it was the logistics of it was a huge, phenomenal thing. And mostly the question marks of, are we being too Catholic? Because for some people that was a concern, or are we not being Lutheran enough? Because for some people that was a concern. And the writing of that was really interesting and complex. And of course, we have language barriers and cultural barriers to navigate in all of that. So God bless all the people who figured that out. I would say for me, there was another, there was a Polish dancer, a young man, who was also part of the choreography, and it was really excellent to have him there as another translator. He could speak Polish and a little bit of German. The four major languages were Spanish, French, German, and English. So worship services were held in all four languages, sort of weaving in and out. We sang in all four languages, plus a couple others. And that is, I think, one of the coolest resources to come out, is this book here, Reconciled and Renewed Assembly Worship, is going to be available online for congregations around the world to access for free. And all of the copyright and stuff has been figured out. So congregations can share the music from the assembly in worship without dealing with copyright concerns, because once you've gotten into this, I don't even think there's a membership fee. Uwe, who was on the planning team, created this online resource that Lutheran congregations around the world will now share as a global music resource, which I think is a really, really cool thing. And I know Tom and Mary have been a huge part of creating that global music culture and community. So I think for them, this is sort of a massive accomplishment. And this German member of the team, Uwe, was a huge part of making that happen. So that was a really fun thing to learn about. Really exciting thing to come out of there, because the music was truly fantastic. And Tom and Mary played a huge part. Also fun that several of us here know Barb Rossing from our Holden days. She's a professor down in Chicago, and she was one of the four Bible study leaders. And just an excellent presentation. And the Bible studies are also, I think, available online. And so you can get all four of those Bible studies, I'm pretty sure, on the LWF website. And that could be just a really cool, like, Advent series, or 4-week series of going through these Bible studies that have been prepared from scholars from around the world, from the Lutheran expression. And really interesting to get those different perspectives and those different points of view from there. And then for me, a personal highlight was, I guess I don't know if you can call it a highlight, but we visited together. We all went to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and that was my third time there, all with church groups. So I went first with my choir tour in '91 to age myself. And then again, in my first call, I went with a tour group led by her brokering. And we went to Birkenau again. And then this time, it's really stuck with me more than when I was younger, what happened there. And Piotr, who was one of the Polish members of the worship planning team, is a descendant of a survivor of Auschwitz. And so to hear his story, which we didn't all get to hear, but about his grandfather's experience in Auschwitz was really a powerful thing. And then we had a prayer time at the end of that, at the end of the railway line, and that leads into the Birkenau station. And that was really fascinating also. And different people who were not part of the LWF group were there. And several of them joined that without really knowing what they were getting into, I think. But also, I think for a lot of people, it was a chance to process and grieve together. And that was, I think, one of my favorite worship elements was the fact we used fabric to stamp. We stamped in 4 different languages, "How long, O Lord," at the end of that prayer time at Birkenau. And then that fabric came into worship again the next day. And we flipped it over and we did a remembrance of the saints, and we wrote the names of all the saints on the backside of that fabric, which was then draped over the cross. And I think that was for me, that was a really powerful. We're going to remember the pain, and we're going to remember these leaders from old and our own loved ones in their suffering and in their joy. So I think the worship was really a powerful experience. Liza knows a lot more about what actually happened and can tell you about life at Agiha, where a lot of the people, almost everybody, stayed. Worship team got a little special treatment just because we had to be there so late in the morning. We were across the street at a hotel. Everybody else is 20 minutes away. Take it away.
I did not know that I would be speaking here, so I have legitimately not been prepared. So I can start with like Agaha and just maybe what like a daily thing was for me, like how I went through my day. So first of all, the most important thing is that I'm a theological student. That's the term that is used for a person who is not the youth delegate. I was officially a visitor. There was a bit of hierarchy, or a lot of hierarchy among the people who were there. There were delegates. Those were people usually with voting power, about 358 people. And it's like the House of Reps. You get it by percent. Maybe I'm totally not knowing my own US government, but it's by percentage by population and how many people are in your Lutheran church. So like the Lutheran Church of Jesus, and then Ethiopia, fastest growing Lutheran church in the world, 10.8 million members. The LCA has 3.4 million members. So fast, like Lutheran church is growing the fastest in Africa. So delegates were at the top, and then there were official guests, ecumenical guests, visitors like myself, and presenters, people who were on, like I noticed this, Hope for the Future, which was one of the documents, the study document was chaired by my professor, Esther Menn, wrote this. So she was a presenter and got to sit in a special section. And so that big assembly hall that Emily mentioned, that was where we had all of our plenaries, and delegates would all be on the floor and the visitors would be up 2 levels, and just depending on like kind of how important you were, and I put that in air quotes, because then we all went out into ICE, the Congress Center, and just like mingled around and talked to each other, and it didn't really matter whether you were wearing a collar or not, or which country you were from. Maybe the only challenge that you would have in speaking with somebody would be a language barrier, but it wouldn't really matter how much power you had in the LWF. One thing that we did, before I talk more about the day-to-day in the assembly, was we went to local churches, local congregations for worship. Local meaning like around Poland and some in Czech Republic and Slovakia. I went to Katowice, which is an hour away from Krakow, and in my group was the LWF president outgoing and the LWF president incoming. And there were 10 of us. And so like these are really important people in the LWF, right? They make a lot of big decisions. And they were just goofing off at a table at lunch with myself and another theological student from Germany. And that was something that as a young person, I think was really important to see, like just the humanity of these people, like that make really important decisions and lead really important discussions and set the agenda for what the worldwide, like the global Lutheran Church is going to talk about. And they're just people who have heard this calling and followed it and ended up in Krakow, Poland with like a 24-year-old from Minnesota. That was really cool. But the day-to-day, so I stayed at Agaha, AGH, which was like a student apartment situation, 15 floors in 2 buildings. And yeah, 90%, unless you're super special in the worship team or the LWF president or something, stayed at Agaha. And at Agaha, we had our own rooms with a little kitchenette and a bathroom. And so I was roomed with Shemaiah, who is my colleague at LSTC. That is how I was able to go, was through funding from like a Marple fellowship from the United Lutheran Seminary. So there were about 20 theological students that were able to come from the ELCA, 5 out of 7 seminaries, because of this fund. So Shemaiah also received that, and we were roomed together, and they served us meals. We had breakfast every morning at Agaha. We had public transport cards, so we all took the transit system, 20 minutes to ICE, and it was not anything super fancy. It was how I would probably choose to find accommodation if I was just visiting Krakow by myself, because it wasn't anything super expensive, but we were hosted really well, and there were signs everywhere, and there were people guiding us. Like, I cannot even stress how much of a smooth operation this was, and how many volunteers and native Polish volunteers, and also young volunteers from around the world. That was another way that young people were able to get to the assemblies, if they agreed to be stewards and to lead so many people guiding us day to day, helping us to check in at ICE every day. We had name tags that we had to scan to make sure that we weren't just rolling in there. Like I don't know about behind the scenes so much, but that is something that I can't even wrap my head around, just how smooth it was. So I would wake up, get breakfast at Agaha, and then go to ICE. Every morning we had worship, and I sang in the assembly choir. I was a little bit voluntold to do that, and it was a super awesome experience and a great way for regular people like me to meet leaders and to like kind of become a part of this establishment in a way, because if you came as a visitor and you weren't going to speak and you weren't on a committee, then it was sometimes hard to feel like you had a role at the LWF. Like I was mostly there to learn, but being in the assembly choir gave me like a little job and something to look forward to, and it was super early mornings, so it also got me out of bed and stopped me from staying out late and partying, which is also an easy thing to do at Agaha. And then we would have our morning plenary. There were sort of 3 types of plenaries. There would be keynote speakers or official speeches, LWF president, general secretary. After Auschwitz, we had a person who had survived Auschwitz-Birkenau come, a Holocaust survivor, and speak. So we would have sort of official speeches, and then we would have thematic plenaries. So our theme was one body, one spirit, one hope. So there were 3, a person talking on one body, a person talking on one spirit, a person talking on one hope, and that happened throughout. And then they had business meetings, which were the most boring and most exciting part at the same time, where they would vote on the new council or vote on changing language in press and official releases. So like the very last day, they went over like an hour overtime because they were doing little tiny word changes to the statement for the LWF. Little tiny things like, I would like to put a comma here because I think that we don't want to lump these 2 ideas so quickly together. And then someone would say, no, but you know, in English, it's grammatically correct. Yeah, so the 4 languages, those are the 4 official languages of the LWF. So everything goes out only in those 4 languages. So that was a thing too. Someone would come up, say, hi, my name is Liza. I'm from the United States of America, and I was speaking in English, and then you would give your thing. As a visitor, I did not get to make any comments on anything at all. I just got to listen. The delegates down on the floor did everything. And we had little translator devices in our ears so that everybody could understand. And also it was handy for accessibility purposes. There was an ecumenical panel that happens during the opening worship on the last day. And it was really hard to hear, and you could put the device in your ear and they were speaking English, and I'm a native English speaker and I couldn't hear very well, so I could put it in and turn up the volume and hear better. So that was also something that was nice, and it wasn't like a headset that kind of didn't fit everybody. What else do you want to know? I'm kind of like, there's a lot. What'd you say? What were these? Oh, the biggest. So there's a lot of issues, and a lot of the issues and topics were carried over from the last assembly 7 years ago, and I was not there. And so I didn't know about those going in, but my impression was, first of all, climate change and climate justice. Because if you talk about the global church, it's experienced different by everyone. It's talked about differently. It's accepted or not accepted as an issue around the world, and especially the young people, the youth are what we're called. There's a discrepancy if you're 30 and under, 35 and under, but youth could be like a full-grown person with a family and a stable job, or you could be me. So I'm genuinely, there were 20 girls there. So like when I say youth, that's what I mean. It's quite a wide range, but the youth really focused on climate justice. And from my estimation, it wasn't a lot of specifics. One thing that I thought was interesting that my group talked about was a movement from the youth was like plastic-free church, which is super awesome and really important, and also is kind of privileged, like a privileged way of looking at things. One of our theological student from LSTC has vision impairment, and she talked about how sometimes the use of plastics is like more helpful to be able to get into things versus something that is plastic free. It's not always accessible for her to be able to see and open it. And I'm explaining that really horribly, and I wish she was here to say it in her own words. So I thought that was interesting. They would have ideas about, here's how we can, you know, save the earth and do all these things, but it would be from a very Western European and North American viewpoint, despite the fact that the global Lutheran Church is more in the Southern Hemisphere than up here. So there was that. Another big one was gender justice, and especially the ordination of women. In Poland, Lutheranism is a minority. I think it's like 1% of the population. And Poland is very Catholic, and so ordination of women it's not just a theological issue, it's also like a social and cultural and political issue in countries. And so I would be speaking to even a young person from another country and say, oh, like, are you a delegate? That was the first thing. Are you a delegate? No. Oh, I'm like, okay, sorry. But then I would say, no, I'm a theological student. Oh, what are you studying? Well, I want to be a pastor. And then they say, oh, you can be a pastor. And that was really interesting for me to experience, because in the United States, normally I only get that from people who maybe think that I'm Missouri Synod and not ELCA. But here was another Lutheran from Australia, actually, thinking that I could not be a pastor because I'm a woman in the United States was interesting. So there was gender justice, there was climate justice, and also something that really shaped the assembly before the assembly even started and during was the war in Ukraine. And I can't speak to, I know that there was something, you should look it up. I'm sure there's an official statement on it, on churches in Russia, whether or not they were going to be allowed to be at the LWF. In the end, I'm not sure whether or not they were. There were a lot of countries that are 150 member churches and 2 in this 2-year trial period before they joined. And so every single speech talked about peace. And I think, me personally, peace is a word that can be really loaded if you don't explain what kind of peace or how to get peace. And they didn't always do that. But the war in Ukraine was something that I feel like, if it wasn't overtly talked about, sort of sat under the surface of everything and made people a little bit nervous, like, we need to deal with this, but we're not quite sure how, because we have so many minute differences between us that makes talking about something like this hard. And talking about human rights hard, because certain human rights are more cared about in certain parts of the world than others. So that was a big thing. I'm trying to think from my video what my from my notes, I wish I had my notes. But those were 3 things that I noticed were mentioned the most. Yeah.
So the worship team was allotted 3 of those stewards that Liza mentioned, which are young adults who signed up specifically to work while they were at the assembly. And one of our 3 stewards, young adults, was a 32-year-old pastor from Finland, who was kind of the coordinator of a bunch of the volunteers. So people who would show up and move fabric and dance and different things like that. And she said that one of her frustrations was the pre-assembly. There was a pre-assembly men's gathering, a pre-assembly women's gathering, and a pre-assembly youth gathering, which was with 18 to 35-year-olds. And one of her frustrations, coming from that Western European, North American perspective, was that in the youth pre-assembly, the youth couldn't decide amongst themselves about LGBTQIA justice. And because of our different cultural and political contexts. And therefore, the assembly, they were told that they could not raise the topic. So because the youth couldn't decide that this was a thing that they were going to memorialize to the assembly as a whole, it could not be a topic at all. And so it was very brave on the part of our opening worship preacher, Danielle, who was Jamaican, but also from Suriname and studying in Germany right now. So this is a fantastic thing to learn, is people other than clergy in America, and there are some clergy in America who do this, but so many of the clergy people I met are from one country and studying in a completely different part of the world to get their doctorate or their, another degree. It was really fascinating. And they all know so many more languages than most of us from America. But that was a really big frustration for her, but for other people, raising that topic in the assembly. So Danielle raised it as in the opening worship sermon, and that was the only time I heard the acronym LGBTQIA. It was not brought up, so that was a point of tension for many people. Is really was other thing, but then learning the nuances of the Ukrainian, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the nuances that among Polish and other kind of North and Eastern European countries. That was really fascinating for me, that there's a different perspective now than what a lot of us in America hold. For people in like Finland and Poland and sort of those neighboring countries. And not that they're all for Russia, but there is a lot of nuance in who is at fault, who is suffering, what next steps are, how intervention might look. So those were two things that I found really, really fascinating. Yeah.
Can you say a little more about that? What were just some of the different activities that maybe not so much in the meeting, but yeah, what were done?
There aren't a lot. I think that's one of the challenges. Did you hear, Liza, what people's ideas?
I was just saying to mom that, like, in my experience, no one even talked about it. Like, people just, the circles that I was in, like, it was so complicated that they just were sad it was happening and wouldn't talk further.
That was sort of my experience too, and this again was a thought from that Finnish pastor. I had limited access to people, but I think a Finnish perspective is interesting because they jumped right into, they wanted right away to become part of NATO. And thank you. And but that whole decision in Finland, she really struggled with, because that happened so fast, and Finland had been kind of thinking about that, processing that for years and years and years, and then without a general election, without anything, all of a sudden Russia invades Ukraine and Finland is into NATO, and these things are starting to happen in Finland, so it's affecting Finnish politics. And so that gives it some nuance for people who are like, now wait a second, we didn't vote on that, and we didn't as a people decide that, our government made these decisions. So there was sort of that internal, like, more personal political, or one country politics. And the way forward was not discussed. It's just that it's complicated. There was a lot of talk about it's complicated. And so there wasn't.
But that you mean there wasn't a here in the US, the Ukrainians are the good guys, the Russians are the bad guys. But so you're saying some of that is it's more complicated view than that for some others.
Yeah, and a lot more sort of understanding that there are many groups in Russia who are dying and suffering in order to protest the war. And so let's not just blame Russia. Which complicates a move forward, because do we suddenly start bombing Russia? No, because there are people in Russia who would also like to see this war end. So let's not kill them in our efforts to stop it. So just those kind of things. Yeah.
We have friends who were missionaries in Russia. We managed to get out of Russia as the war was started. But in Russia, it's a very odd situation, because a lot of people have family members in Ukraine. And so, and friends in Ukraine and whatever. So there's that dynamic, but then there's also the media in Russia that is all for Russia. And so it's even a worse political dynamic than here. Like, we're very politically polarized here, like it's even worse there. So it's complicated. Yeah.
I had a question, Emily, about worship culture. And I'm not sure if that's even the right way to get at what I'm trying to ask about, but I find that we hear talk about global music a lot, and I feel like there's a danger. We're always need to be mindful of a kind of like British museum approach to all the really cool music out there, without any representation of the people whose music is being played, and it's like a thing in theater too, and I feel like we're moving pretty glacially, it feels like to me, in terms of that discussion and what it was there any, my question mostly is, was there any discussion there about, it seems like an ideal place to do what we do here when you actually have someone who speaks Swahili actually there, or you know, native Spanish speakers for whom this is an important song. Was there any discussion about, or do people even say global? What do other folks say when they use other people's music?
That's complicated too, because in different countries, the idea of appropriation is very different. Or doesn't even exist. Like, yes, this is our music, sing it. And so, Brian commented on this in the opening worship, that all of a sudden there's this, this clearly a man from Africa, who's the bishop from, Tanzania, who is leading a song, and Tom Witt, white guy from Minnesota, suddenly is up there leading with him. Why can't the guy from Africa just lead? Like, in our sensibilities, we're like, this is an African song, the guy from Africa should lead it. Well, the bishop from Africa asked Tom and said, this really needs two-part harmony. Tom, would you sing it with me? Well, if you're Tom Witt, you don't say no to the bishop from Tanzania when he asks you to sing this song.
Was that invitation public? Did he say?
No, that was in the planning. That was in planning. And so, and that's the hard thing, is the public face of it is we don't see that happening, but it happened. And so what we see is a white guy joining the bishop from Tanzania in singing the song from Africa, that the guy from Tanzania, and Africa's a huge space. So the guy from Tanzania doesn't necessarily have legitimate rights to be singing this, you know, the song just because it's from Africa, because he's from Tanzania, and maybe the song is from Nigeria, or maybe it's from South Africa, or maybe, and so that conversation, I think it was had many times in the planning, in the 2 years of planning. So Tom's been working for 2 years on preparing these worship services and finagling with people from all these different cultural understandings of appropriation and appropriateness. And I think the decision was, and the reason that the book exists now, is this music exists to serve the Lutheran Church in all its diverse expressions. And if the people who wrote the music, who wrote the lyrics, if they have agreed to share it, the idea is they want to share it. They want people to use it. They want it to be sung because the Lutheran Church in the Global Assembly recognizes we are a global body. And so the music belongs to all of us. That's kind of my underlying understanding. And when at all possible, have the right person lead that song, introduce that song, share whatever history you can about that song in the culture of New Jersey. But also don't hide the music because you don't have that proper person in place, because the music is there as a cultural expression and is meant to be shared. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but the idea is it's there. The musicians and the church leaders want to share it. And so they're making it as available as they can and as accessible as they can because they want it shared. No. And I don't want to hold the microphone too long. I do have another fun story that I'm sure, but
I'm just curious how they choose what country for the assembly, where they're gonna hold the assembly. You said it's a low number of Lutherans, is that a reason, or there were other reasons?
no, they go by there. So there are 4 regions. We're broken into the Asia region, the Africa region, the Americas region, and the European region. And so they rotate between those 4 for every assembly. So obviously it was Europe's turn, and then different cities made their proposals and sort of woo the assembly planners and crack out one out of Europe. And now next assembly in 6 years will mark the 500th anniversary of the Augsburg Confession. And so a lot of people are saying we should be holding it in Germany, at least. But Europe just had it. And so in rotation, it should be in South America. Like that's the next place that we are, according to the rotation, that's where we're supposed to go. And so, again, behind the scenes, those of us who have no deciding power whatsoever, we're like, well, you gotta go to South America. You can't, that's another colonizing of the churches to say that because this historic thing happened 500 years ago in Germany, it's an excuse to hold it in another Northern European country. So, but we had no power. We were sitting there folding fabric and not in any decision-making place. But so it's sort of by region, according to rotation, and then whatever committee sort of makes a bid that is, and I think with Krakow, being able to go to Auschwitz-Birkenau was a key thing there, like there needs to be some draw that is in accordance with the justice measure that we're seeking. And the Jewish relations was a big thing that we talked about while we were in Krakow, which just makes sense then.
Okay, so, did anti-nuclear or nuclear disarmament come up between the coalition and nuclear weapons?
Not at all that I know of. Maybe. Here's a fun story. Like Liza, I got to spend a really good time with the outgoing president, Musa Philibus, who is from Nigeria. And so he will go back to simply being the bishop of Nigeria. Because all of this is volunteer. So being president of the LWF is a volunteer position. And in our final worship service, he was handing over that role to the incoming president, who was from Denmark. And he shared the story that 100 years ago, it was 4 Danish missionaries who started the Lutheran Church in Nigeria. And now he is Nigerian is handing the leadership of the whole Lutheran World Federation over to a Danish. Now, Musa Philibus was a classmate of mine at Luther Seminary. And so I was all excited to say, hi, remember me from seminary? No, okay, that's good. And then it turns out, because of being in the worship team, I was staying across the street at the hotel, and my flight home was at 6:30 in the morning, and his flight home was at 6 o'clock in the morning. And because he's the LWF president, people were setting up a taxi for him. And Tom said, well, why don't you just see if you can ride with Musa? And I said, okay. And so I went and asked the woman who was setting up the taxi, and sure, there's room in the taxi. I can ride with Musa Philibus to the airport. So I'm up at 3:15 in the morning to get into the taxi to go to the airport. And you better strike up a conversation with the outgoing president. So I did, and he's from Nigeria. And it turns out that Catherine Preuss, who is our accompanist here at OSLC, her mom, Mary Preuss, and her dad, Jonathan Preuss, were missionaries in Nigeria many years ago. And so I said, and they talked at the theological school there. And I said, did you know Jonathan and Mary Preuss? Well, Jonathan and Mary Preuss are also my godparents. I'm Catherine's cousin. And he said, oh, yes, I love Mary Preuss. And I said, really? He said, yes. When I was working on my dissertation, she gave me an A. And she was my New Testament, my New Testament teacher. And she gave me an A on one of my big final papers. And the seminary looked at it and refuted the A and gave me a C. And Mary Preuss wrote me a 3-page letter of affirmation saying, no, he deserves an A. And he said, in an unusual turn of circumstances, they agreed with her. And they gave me an A. And now he's the president of the LWF. And so I can't wait to tell John and Mary that story, that he holds them in great esteem, and he still knows what's going on in their lives right now. And so our LWF president at 3 in the morning was telling me how much he loves my godparents. It's really sweet. And I have to say a giant thank you to all of you, because if I hadn't been asked to dance and choreograph here, I'm very confident that I wouldn't have gone there. So thank you for letting me do the dance things here. Because because that made me get to dance in Krakow. So thank you. Any other thoughts? Oh, just an FYI, these were made locally in Krakow. And one of our little dancers, her mother loves this pottery. So she came in at the very end and asked if she could have one of the last pictures to go out the door, which was very sweet. But all of us who were on the worship team got to have a picture. This is where the wine was served in that giant assembly. And then everybody at the assembly in the final worship service got their own little communion cup. So Liza and I, and Tom and Mary and everybody else have one of the little cups with the little logo on it. And I just thought that was a lovely keepsake that we all have our communion cups. Any questions?
Question. I stepped out for a little bit, so I might have heard it, but you mentioned the mechanic whose church is the fastest growing church and 10 million members, right? I wondered if they had a significant voice at the assembly. And you mentioned Liza, especially, and like a lot of it's pretty like Western centric. Did you hear from that church or other members of like Global South churches, and what were like the main concerns that they raised? What did you learn from the churches?
We kind of mentioned already like what the issues were raised, where I tried to like dig it from my memory. But something that I thought was interesting, yes, did hear from Global South churches. The bishop in Ethiopia is a keynote speaker, and that information is also, not information, speech is also available from the LWF Assembly website. Anybody can go read it. They put it up as soon as it was given, so you can read that. Something that I found interesting and not so great as an observer is when there were panel discussions. The white folks were the ones who were talking. The Europeans and the North Americans were the ones who had gave themselves the most microphone time. We talked about that a lot in our theological student group as well. And so in a situation where church leaders or congregants from Lutheran churches in the Global South may have been able to raise more issues in a panel situation and not in a let me go to the mic and speak for my allotted 1 to 3 minutes. They were more often than not the first one to respond, and so weren't able to speak on that. I experienced that when I went to a workshop on this Jewish Christian relations book that happened. They had 7 representatives from all of the parts of the LWF, like the 4 regions and then some sub-regions. And it was the European from Germany that spoke the most. And not even the rabbi who was the consultant. So that was an issue that I think we talk a lot about here, just in a racialized way, but also in a cultural way across the globe, across the world. That was something that unfortunately was very evident. And we even talked about that in the fact that our general secretary is from Estonia and now our president is from Denmark. And that is actually the same region. I think we're very close to each other. You can take a vote between the countries. That's kind of an issue when we're talking about the fact that we want to like have more equity among who is speaking and from where they come. So that was something that we didn't really resolve as a student group, because really this is like 6-7 days and there wasn't a lot of time to talk to super long days. But something that we just noticed and like felt some uncomfortability about, especially as Americans. Wow, just speak. Someone said, Jim.
Just a bit of context with the church in Ethiopia, how large it is and how fast it's growing. The church in Tanzania is doing the same thing, and it is not quite as big, but almost. And I haven't seen the statistic recently, but it's not very old, that 2 of the 4 largest Lutheran church bodies in the world are Tanzania and Ethiopia. And in Southern Africa, in Namibia, where I spent a bit of time, it's a different country because almost nobody lives there, but it's a desert. 60% of the population is Lutheran. The numbers aren't so big, but the number of Lutherans is so it just reinforces what you're talking about, and that is the fact that we're the where our church is growing. In the south.
And something that, Lucy talked about when we were in Katowice, somebody asked him, was at this church that we went to, there's a large group of youth, like young, like children that came up for a small children's sermon in that way, and so, someone asked, well, are there a lot of children around your church, or like, is your church growing? And I don't know if they meant Lutheran church or like that specific church, but, Musa talked with me at lunch because, I'm also interested in children in the church. And someone asked him about, why is it growing so fast? And he gave a lot of really specific and correct answers that I can't remember. But what I do remember is he said that it's like culturally families go together to church. Like here, maybe like I've moved away from home. I still attend church, but not here. And so the numbers fluctuate a bit. But in his church, in his context, like the whole family goes together. It's not a question. So that is something with the numbers as well, and is a cultural and social thing that impacts. That there were only 2 sessions that you could go to a workshop. So there were a lot of options. I wonder, I think you can get it online, a list of all the workshops. What I wanted to attend mostly were things that I thought would apply to my theological education. And so I went to Bill Russell's talk on the Lutheran Confessions Project in Wittenberg. And then I also went to my professor's talk on Jewish Christian relations. They had a lot of them, like anything that you could think of that you would possibly think is an issue in the global church, they had something on. And I don't know how they selected who was able to be a presenter. They called it there was Yarmark, which was like a marketplace where you could go from table to table and learn things. And then they had workshops, which were like hour-and-a-half sessions. On the LWF Assembly webpage, I know that they have the whole list of Yarmark and workshop presenters, but those were the 2 that I went to because I was interested in my theological education. Yeah.
Well, let's ask more about I'll call it the church in Africa, whether that's the Ethiopian or the Tanzanian or the Liberian. Did you get a sense in your exchanges with people about, the issues of the Lutheran Church or anything that is helpful about our understanding of God?
Of like our relationship to them, or
just, I'm very curious about the congregation. And what are they up to, and what's it like? I mean, Ethiopia, big lots going on, and similarly in Tanzania and Liberia.
I am not equipped to answer that in a super correct way, so I maybe won't attempt because I don't want to accidentally hurt someone. But
can I get? And I would assume mastery of English is a big issue in
yeah, and also mastery of Spanish, or like going the other direction. I don't speak any Spanish at all, and that what I found was sort of actually like a very big issue for me. I can't speak to specifics in Lutheran churches in Africa. It is not something I study, and it's not something that I unfortunately was able to talk with people a whole lot. Like I said, I'm a visitor, so I wasn't really chatting with the bishops about their specific contexts. Something that I was super aware of, noticing my peers and how they interacted, peers from the ELCA, how they interacted with other people, is that we really think that we're like the top Lutherans. Like the ELCA really thinks that they can handle, like that they have a lot of say and a lot of sway in the Lutheran Church worldwide, and they're a huge part of it. At least for sure, the people that I was with, I noticed that trend. And you could see it in the number of visitors and delegates, like the disproportionate number of ELCA people that came.
Sorry, what's that? Choir is gonna be singing in the sanctuary in about 4 minutes, just practicing and singing a song. So anybody in the choir, we'd love to have you over. And if you haven't been yet, you want to be, come on. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. So that was something that I just noticed, and I think that I wondered too about accessibility. I sat next to somebody on the bus on my second day who is from Indonesia and took in small islands off of Indonesia, and took a 6-hour speedboat and 4 planes and a train to get to Krakow, and I took 2 flights and was super tired, and he was a delegate, it was his first time out in Indonesia, and so also accessibility for these, for countries around, like Europeans, some of them just drove 3 hours to get to the assembly. That's why it's so important that it is in these different parts around the world. So accessibility to the conference as well, language wise, whether or not you have a voice, didn't really matter what church they were from. That was always an issue. That they said, oh, the young people are the future, the young people are the future, and then the young people would go out in the hallway and say, no one's letting us into the room to talk about things that matter to us. So yeah.
Wow, thank you so much, Liza and Emily, for bringing Krakow to us. What a gift that our little church at 24th in Chicago had, 4 people there, Emily and Liza and Tom and Mary. I mean, it's so amazing. It's just a gift. And I just want to, while I have your attention, mention 2 things. And one is that we are doing a book study this fall on a book by Robert Jones called The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy and Our Path to a Shared American Future. We had 10 copies out last week and they all disappeared, which is great. So some of you took it home. Others of you, please purchase a copy if you want to participate. We'll start having conversations in October. And if you need help getting a copy, please be in touch with me. There also is a schedule that Paul and Levon wrote out of how we're reading it and when we're discussing it. So that's in the office right now. I'm going to grab those sheets and put them on the table, the conversation table out there. So if you want to participate in the discussion, grab one of those. And then I also want to highlight the Sacred Sites Tour. And Mike, I'm wondering if there are still spaces in the Sacred Sites Tour.
I'm not sure, but if there are, this is your day, let me know.
This is the day. Wonderful. So talk to Mike today if you want to be part of the Sacred Sites Tour on October 7th. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, rinse the top of your hands in the.
Yeah.